I'm Genia. I'm the founder of Good Things in Life and host of the Good Things in Life podcast. My pronouns are she and her. I'm recording this on or in Leeds Grenville, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee Iroquois, Oneida, and Haudenosaunee St. Lawrence Iroquois peoples. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. I am grateful as a settler for the opportunity to meet here, and I thank all the generations of people who've taken care of this land for thousands of years. I help parents support their kids with significant disabilities to build positive, inclusive lives using a pathway that creates access to the good things in life. So, my friend, let's see where you currently are on the path and how I can help you.
I'll get started. I am definitely in the position of invoking the Mohawk prayer, which was discussed at the beginning of the conference. I was invited to present this just last week, and this is a presentation that I've been planning and working on, but have been furiously trying to get it ready. And then an hour ago, my long-standing love-hate relationship with PowerPoint reared its ugly head. So hopefully this is all going to go well. So I'll be talking today about the 3 dimensions of a positive and rare life for people with disabilities. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Genia Stephen. I had the great grace and benefit of growing up in a really disability positive community. I have a younger sister who has a disability. And while my mom had no idea about anything around how to support somebody to build a good life, when my sister was diagnosed as having a disability, she very quickly became connected with a lot of the people who are old guards here at the Toronto Summer Institute. And so I really grew up at the feet of greats. 15 years ago, I had my second son, Will, and Will was born with significant disabilities and medical complexities. And I started my parenting journey at a very different place than my mom had. I had people surrounding me. I had lots of time to unpack what it means to be somebody with a disability and build a positive life in our community. Over the last more than 10 years now, I've also been a practicing midwife, plus have been connected with lots and lots of parents of young kids with disabilities. And what really, really struck me is that parents today are still starting very much like my mother started more than 40 years ago, having no connections, no relationships, still not having gone to school with people with disabilities, still not having employee or employment colleagues in their lives with disabilities. And the difference being that between my mom's journey and young parents' journey right now is that, when my mom was first trying to figure this out, she was referred to a local organization who referred her to one parent, and that one parent referred her to other people. And there was a network of people. And now what happens is that young parents, I say young meaning, early in their parenting journey of somebody with a disability, now what happens is that they get a diagnosis of a disability or even the possibility of a diagnosis, and they Google that diagnosis. And what they get is a list of complications and a list of diagnosis-specific Facebook groups, many of which are really quite toxic. And so it just became more and more compelled to try and close the gap between my experience of raising a child with a disability and so many other parents who are really starting from scratch, never having had the opportunities that I've benefited from. So in this presentation, we're going to delve into some of the reasons why people with disabilities so rarely have a positive life. We're going to touch on what most frequently happens in people's lives at a really high level, but we're not really going to go deeply into what it means to live a life in service. And we're going to talk about the 3 dimensions or pillars of support that are required for someone to seek themselves and support that's required in order to build a positive and inclusive life. So the why of this presentation in particular, I'm very aware that of the I guess there's 22 people other than myself in this room right now. I'm really speaking to people who have already had opportunities to really think deeply about this. This presentation came as came out of my observation that families are still being sluiced into service land, sluiced into the medical model of disability, and that it's often not until people are aging out of high school that parents have are presented with this possibility of thinking about what happens now. Where is the life, the positive life of the person? What are the possibilities? And so part of my goal and mission with Good Things in Life is really to reach parents very early on in their journey, provide them with an opportunity to think differently about disability and what it takes to raise their kids to have a positive life. And then through Inclusion Academy, which is Good Things in Life's monthly membership, to support people in the how we actually do this. So this presentation is really about the what, not the how. So I think it's really important to just spend a minute to think about, what are the good things in life. We can recognize pretty generically that most of us that would agree that some of the good things in life are things like relationships, making a contribution, personal growth. Not yesterday, the day one of the Summer Institute, during Marcus's presentation, he had this background behind him, and I took a quick screenshot with my phone because I think it's a really helpful way of talking about the universality of how people understand the good things of life. So what this says is we need love, having family and friends, loving and being loved, to have a life living fully and making a difference, to have a home, having a place where we belong, having freedom, taking charge of our own life, having help, giving and receiving help from others, purpose, setting our own direction, and money, having enough to live well. These are some of the universal good things in life. There's also been some research by Martin Elks that demonstrates that when you look at how the good things in life are defined around the world, that there's an awful lot of correlation. There's an awful lot of agreement about what constitutes the good things in life, at least broadly. While specifically, of course, we may, the 7 keys to citizenship here, obviously the details of that can look very different, but we can at least agree for this presentation and when we're thinking about supporting people to build positive lives and have access to the good things in life, that these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. And essentially, one might say that the good things in life are what comes when, with radical citizenship, when you're a full and contributing participant in community life. Okay, so let's get into the 3 dimensions. The 3 dimensions are unpacking the problem, setting an alternative course, and taking rare action. And we're going to go into each of these individually. Okay, so the first dimension of what's required in order for us to really help somebody to access the good things in life is unpacking the problem. And the problem that people with disabilities face is relatively rare because most people don't face the same kind of challenges. People with disabilities are pretty much the last group of people who are commonly accepted by society to be better off somewhere else with special people in special places with others just like them. Now, there are definitely some similarities with the problems and challenges that Black, Indigenous, and people of color face, for sure. We can think about other people who face these next 3 aspects of the problem. But people with disabilities certainly are unique in that even the families of people with disabilities are often complicit in contributing to the problem. as opposed to a whole section of society being marginalized by another section of society. So when we think about unpacking the problem, the first thing that we need to think about is devaluation. The second is unconsciousness. And the third is the medical model of disability. And I'll go into each of those. So devaluation. Devaluation means that somebody has, or what it means within this context is that somebody has some characteristic about themselves that is not perceived positively by the general society. And it does not mean that the person themselves is not valuable, but we need to recognize and appreciate and certainly be honest with ourselves and with others that when you have a characteristic that's not seen positively by the rest of society, that then has several consequences. Another really important point to recognize is that society tends to set what we value and devalue. So we value things like ability and competency. We devalue things like impairment and disability. We value wealth and beauty. We devalue poverty and things that are not attractive. And we are all part of society. We absorb the societal values. And this is part of us, even if we love somebody that has a devalued characteristic. So some of the consequences of devaluation, having a devalued characteristic in society, is that you're marginalized, you're kept apart, you're treated as other. People have low expectations of what you can accomplish and also low expectations of what your life ought to be like. You're subjected to many stereotypes. And you're also likely to be deprived of really common, typical, and important experiences, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. And I just want to pause the screen here and come back to the group and ask for your input. What are some of the other consequences of being a devalued member of society? And you can either fill it in the chat or unmute yourself. We're a small enough group that I think that'll work.
I think one thing that I'm thinking of right now is just the idea that if you have a disability, all of a sudden, or a label or a title or anything, all of a sudden you can't just have a reaction. You can't just be upset or be in a mood or just have a rough day without there being all of these other conversations and people being pulled into that, different professionals, clinical teams, to kind of just analyze your mood of the day. So that's something that's kind of popping up for me.
Yeah. And in the chat, we have having one's life wasted, one's self-esteem suffers. Being poor and unemployed is a likely consequence, viewed as being a burden, viewed with pity. These are all not feeling included. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, it was just to say that, I mean, it's not to add anything, Genia, but I just think the impact of low expectations is actually far greater than people appreciate, I think, sometimes. I work with a lot of young people who emerge from the other end of the education system with enormously low expectations around them and in their own heads. And that really undermines your ability to think that you can actually do anything about it yourself or families as well. So I thought I absolutely think you're on the money when you're describing that.
Yeah, I agree. And we can talk, and I will talk a little bit more about low expectations, but we could have an entire summer institute on the impact of low expectations. I agree with you, Steve. Okay, I'm going to go back to screen share here. People are continuing to contribute really important observations about the consequences of being devalued in society. Okay, so we said the three aspects of the problem that we're going to unpack are devaluation, unconsciousness, and the medical model of disability. I'm going to talk about unconsciousness just really briefly. most of what is in our minds is unconscious. And aspects of what we think that don't fit with our own self-image tend to live in the unconscious because we just don't like it very much. So if I have absorbed, for example, all of the subtle and not so subtle aspects of white supremacy culture in North America, I'm not likely to recognize the way that that manifests in my behavior and my thoughts, because I don't want to think about myself as a white supremacist. It doesn't mean, however, that in my unconscious mind that I haven't absorbed those racist structures, ideas, and assumptions. The other really important thing to recognize about unconsciousness, let's see here. Sorry. The other really important thing to recognize about unconsciousness is that what is in our unconscious mind will be expressed in our actions and in our conscious thoughts, in the way we approach the world. And so what that means then between devaluation and unconsciousness is that we recognize people with disabilities are not highly valued in our society. The consequences of that are extremely negative, and that people generally, when you're speaking with them, aren't going to say, I agree, I think people with disabilities aren't very valuable. Now, there's lots of that, but lots of the people that you're talking to who are trying to help people with disabilities or who are speaking kindly about people with disabilities are still going to have the unconscious absorbed devaluation, and it's going to come out in the way that people are treated. And the third aspect of unpacking the problem that I think is key is understanding medical models and social models of disability. Now, there are many more models, and I encourage people actually to do a YouTube search. It's a really, in half an hour, you can get an excellent overview of all the different thought models of disability, and it's really quite thought-provoking. But for the purposes of unpacking this problem, we can just use two. So the medical model of disability, while it has been challenged for many, many years, still dominates. It's the most prevalent way that people think about disability. It's deficit focused. The path to a good life, according to the medical model, is to fix what's wrong. It identifies the disability as the problem, and it starts at birth or at diagnosis. So, as I said, it's deficit focused. It focuses on being fixed. It posits that therapy is the right approach instead of experiences. It focuses on people's weaknesses instead of strengths. And the location of the problem is internal to the person. It also, the medical model of disability, says that there's a fundamental problem with the person, something that is inherent right to their core. This is the Bodleian Library at the University of Oxford in England, where I just finished and submitted my dissertation for my Master's of Science in Evidence-Based Healthcare. And what I looked at was parents' experiences in neonatal intensive care units and how those experiences shaped their perception of a positive life for their children. In the interest of time, I was going to read you the abstract, and I don't think we have time, but suffice it to say that it's not good, that these early negative messages are being unconsciously communicated to parents right from word go. And one of the cool things about the Bodleian Library is that it is the location of the Forbidden Library in the Harry Potter series, which is super cool, but also I thought really apt here, because really what I found in my research ought to be behavior that's forbidden within any healthcare service that is telling parents what to expect for their children's future. What I found is that words like alien, it, severe, and abnormal were dominantly used to describe babies, that babies were framed not as a baby, but as a problem, that they were described as not fully human and other, that they were abnormal, that their impairments were severe, and so were they. They were severe, and that they were a burden. Now, we're not saying with the medical model of disability that there's no, no impact whatsoever. There is an impact. Impairment does have an impact. So some of the challenges that people face are very clearly related to their disability. For example, children with disability, or all children learn through play and experimentation, but some impairments, some disabilities might mean that play and experimentation options that are typical for some kids just aren't available for that child with a disability. This is a little quick video, which I can't make play, unfortunately, of my daughter using my son's ceiling lift in order to play. She's exploring her limits. She's building up her muscle mass and her courage and her coordination. While my son requires that just to move from couch to wheelchair. There's definitely an impact of impairment there. The important question, however, is what we do about this challenge. Do we spend time, and a lot of it, on therapies and interventions trying to fix the disability, or perhaps on something else? And I'll speak more about that as we move on. So what my research found, and what I propose here, is that the social model of disability, again, while not the only or necessarily even the best model of disability, still provides us with some helpful frameworks, some helpful ideas. The social model of disability says that it's social and society where the problem is located, that it's external to the person. The problem is external to the person, that the problem is inherent in the structures of our society and our culture, that people experience challenges because of other people's attitudes, that macro change, changing society and changing the people outside of the person with the disability, is the approach that is going to be most helpful in overcoming some of the challenges that people with disabilities face, and that it's situational and not fundamental to who the person is. The social model of disability isn't a denial of the challenges that disabilities may create, but it does say that people have contributions that our communities need. And one, I'm hoping that many of you were able to hear Fionn and Jonathan talk about the Happiness Project. And one can imagine the difference between what parents experienced in my dissertation study of hearing their children talked about as alien, other, not fully human, versus how they might see the positive aspects of their children's future if what they had been introduced to was Fionathan's Happiness Project. And the reason that we have to care so deeply about the problem is because we have to identify correctly what the problem is in order to find the right solution. The second pillar or dimension of a positive and rare life is setting an alternative course. If you look around, if you follow the current dominant pathways for people with disabilities, what you see is early intervention, special education, therapies, residential and day program services. There's little evidence of those good things in life that we talked about earlier. People go from one service to another service to another service. And what we see is that people's lives are smaller than they want. They're separate, they're lonely, and they're unsatisfying. In order to get off of that trajectory, you need an alternative. Darcy Elks talks about vision using these analogies. A vision, an alternative vision, helps by being a North Star to help us keep our eye on the destination, a telescope to help us see far into the distance, a compass to help us move in the right direction, and an anchor to keep us from going off course during turbulent times. And you will get pulled away from your vision, because devaluation and unconsciousness and the dominance of the medical model of disability are going to continue to rear their heads. I have a guide to help people create a vision. And I'm going to hopefully, okay. So when we're thinking about creating an alternative vision, many people think that they're just basically dreaming, and a vision, as I'm talking about it, is something different. You need to think about what you want and what you don't want. You need to look at typical lives, as the basis for your vision. And diversity and variation are fine, but if there's no typical example of what you're thinking about as a good life or the good things in life for the person that you're thinking about, you're probably stuck in some sort of deficit thinking. Of course, as your son or daughter get older, then they're going to want to participate and should participate in creating their own vision for their life. And you want to help them, and you want to think yourself about an age appropriate vision for people's lives. Again, this doesn't narrow us, it doesn't restrict us. There's any number of different ways in which we can become a citizen and a participating member of society. But we want to avoid the twistiness that comes from the problems that are faced, the devaluation, unconsciousness, and medical model. Now, we want to make sure that we are developing a vision that is really crystal clear and specific. We want to write it down, and we want to share it. Share it with yourself, review it regularly, share it with family and friends, bring it to school meetings, and start every meeting by reviewing it. And you can use your vision as well to share with community groups, recreational opportunities. What we see here is that when we deconstruct the problem and we create the vision, that what we get is direction. That awareness and intentionality create direction that is an alternative path to the sluicing into services that so often plague people in their lives. And the third dimension of supporting somebody to build a positive life and access the good things in life is a rare action. And rare action stands for roles, abilities, relationships, and experiences. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to break down then what I mean by roles, abilities, relationships, and experiences. And we'll start by talking about roles. So as defined by Talcott Parsons, a social role can be defined as a socially expected pattern of behaviors, responsibilities, expectations, and privileges. A role is more than the things that we do. It's who we are. It's not just an activity. I do all kinds of activities, but I am a mother, a midwife, a teacher, a student. Social roles are the primary mechanism by which we relate to each other and we function in society. And this is why they're so important. Our roles dictate and grant our privileges, perks, eligibilities, compensations, responsibilities. Our roles tell us how we should behave, and importantly, how others should interact with us. Our roles set out our expectations for ourselves and others' expectations of us. Activities, however, they don't come with responsibilities. They don't come with privileges and perks, and they don't come with eligibilities and compensation. Now, they may come with perks. I should have edited this just a little bit, but they come only in the moment the activity is happening. There's no wave or ripple effect after that. So whether or not we are a mother or not, unless we're a child that has had the culturally expected role of mom disrupted in our lives by absence or poor experience, in all of society, we know what it means to be a mom. And that's true, even though there's no one right way to be a mom. Thank goodness, because even in my own way, I'm usually not doing a particularly good job. But there are limits, right? There are limits to our understanding of what it means to be a mom, even though there are limitless ways and variations of filling the role of mom. If we have a child in our care and we don't comply at least somewhat with the expectations of being a mom, then the state might take that role away from us. And the reason that I'm talking about the fact that our roles can be taken from us is that whether or not we have a role is often dependent on whether or not others accept us in that role. And so the benefits of valued social roles in one's life can be taken away from us if others don't think we belong in that role. So how does that help us? We can look to common social roles, like a student, for example, as a guide to help us with inclusion and a guide to help us foster acceptance of kids with disabilities. We can look at what it means to be a student, a typical student, and we can compare that with what's happening for the student that we're concerned about. And if the difference is too great between what the student with a disability is experiencing and how they're filling the student role from how kids without disabilities are filling that student role, it's very likely that the benefits of being in that student role will be withheld because other people won't see and accept that the student with a disability belongs in that role. This is also true for employment roles. It's true for recreational roles. You know, if you think about the role of a teammate, Lisa could speak at length about this. You know, a member, an artist. You know, any of the valued social roles really come with this need for us to fill them in ways that are typical. Otherwise, we don't get the benefits from them. Okay, the next section, the A, is around abilities for kids. And remember this, while I recognize that many of you have been around for a while, you already know this. My target audience for this is really parents of young kids who are being sluiced from early intervention to segregated special education. And so for that group of people, when we're talking about young children, really, when we're talking about fostering abilities, one of the absolute key things that is required in order to build a positive life is inclusive education and understanding that role of a student. So one of the core focuses, this slide says special education, although I do argue that there's nothing special about special education, and we really, these are priorities in all education. One of the priorities every year in education for kids with disabilities should be communication and literacy, both receptive and expressive. Now, some people might have doubts about whether or not their kids, can learn to read and to communicate. But actually, research and experience has demonstrated that kids with all kinds of significant disabilities can learn to read, write, and communicate. And we're not denying that disability and impairment exist here, neither does the research, but we're focusing on the reality that learning is absolutely possible. And even if one wasn't too sure about somebody's ability to learn to read, write, and communicate, the least dangerous assumption is really helpful here. The least dangerous assumption, and Donnellan, I think, first coined, and the least dangerous assumption means that until our children have the best high quality teaching over a long period of time, and all the external challenges and barriers like people's attitudes are dealt with, and all the internal challenges and barriers are dealt with, like perhaps hearing aids or some other sort of compensatory measure. So internal and external barriers are effectively addressed. We can't logically make any conclusions about the limits of one's potential. This is the idea of the least dangerous assumption. If we assume that kids can learn and have wonderful potential, and we provide them with high quality instruction, excellent support, remove barriers, and we do this over a long period of time, and it turns out that we're mistaken about that, then no harm is going to have come, because in this situation, they definitely will have reached their full potential. However, if we assume that a child cannot, then it would be considered to be a waste of time. And we see this all the time. I'm sure everybody here has lots of examples of this. Be seen as a waste of time to provide high quality instruction, excellent support, to remove barriers over a long period of time. And in that situation, if we're wrong, it's very dangerous, in fact, devastating, because without these interventions and supports, our kids definitely are not going to reach their potential. So I want to just touch briefly on the idea of the myth of readiness. Kids don't need to be ready before they can learn literacy or alternative forms of communication. And we're talking about ability here, right? This is all working back to the idea of supporting people to develop their abilities. People don't need to be ready to develop their abilities. As Norm Kuntz says, and I love this quote of his, you cannot learn to swim in the parking lot of the pool. You know, just using communication and literacy as an example, typically a child has heard basic words in their native language thousands of times before they begin to speak themselves. And kids with disabilities might need to hear them even more times before they're ready. And so, you know, what we see is that people who have communication challenges rarely have the opportunity to experience rich use of those alternative communication systems. My kids are screaming upstairs. Can everybody hear that? So kids with disabilities who have communication challenges, they may need, but almost never get rich immersion in the alternative communication system that they're talking about. So some kids are going to learn faster than that, of course, but none of them are going to learn, none of them being kids, are going to learn if they don't have the opportunity to actually get in the pool and experience swimming. No other life skill will more positively impact a person than communication and literacy skills. And so I just want to pause here again and get some feedback on that. When I'm thinking about helping people build their abilities, what I'm proposing to you is that communication and literacy is the most important ability and life skill if you had to prioritize, which sometimes we do. And so I'm wondering whether or not anybody has any thoughts on that. Is there something more important, a life skill more important? Go ahead, Barb.
I don't know if it's more important, but I do think that it's so important to really look for the strengths of a child, and so that they can communicate what they are learning to us. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't just take away from the whole idea of reading and literacy, but or communication, but perhaps somebody's better at giving it through art or
absolutely
through something else. So yeah, I think we have to use those strengths. And again, it gets away from the medical model, because you're looking for the strengths in a person, not what's wrong with them.
Yeah, agreed. And when I'm thinking about this, particularly for young kids, what I'm thinking about this is within the context of education, like the education system. Where are we focusing? And I'm going to.
While you're doing that, I think, Genia, too, in the education system, we forget the impact that modeling those positive communication skills and that have mm-hmm. within the classrooms as well, and it's forgotten so often. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to skip over a bit here in response to time, but the other focus in education. So the other focus when we're thinking about providing people with when we're thinking about providing people with opportunities to build their abilities is access to curriculum and broadening people's world. So again, when we're thinking about school age children, we're thinking about curriculum, but for anybody, we want to be broadening their world, new facts, realities, ideas, subjects, and perspectives. So, you know, when we're thinking about curriculum, what do we mean? Gordon Porter, who's an inclusive education specialist and has been a guest a couple of times on the Good Things in Life podcast, said, kids go to school in order to become part of their community. and have peers, have relationships so that you're growing up within your community. You need to develop and nurture your communication skills so that you can share with people what you think and what you wonder about the world. And third, while there are lots of discrete academic things that one can learn, the fundamental thing is to learn how to listen, how to process information, how to identify things you're curious about that are problems, and then be able to work with other people to come out with some kind of approach. Essentially, curriculum is designed to help children become contributing citizens of a just and connected society. And regardless, I'm going to get into experiences a little bit. That's the last letter in the rare action. But broadening, curriculum, or whether or not you're talking about somebody who's older, you want to be thinking about supporting people to broaden their understanding of the world, how the world works, develop their critical thinking skills, provide opportunities for new ideas and perspectives, develop problem-solving skills, opportunities to discover new interests and explore, and then connection with peers. I'm not going to pause for this slide here. We're going to keep moving. Relationships is the next part of rare action. And relationships are important because they keep us safe. As Al Condalusi so aptly said, you can't legislate morality. You cannot pass a regulation that will cause people to be nice. And we know that relationships matter, that relationships are in fact some of the most important aspects of our life. And social capital are relationships and networks that have productive benefit in our lives. Relationships actually bring us wealth. Our social capital is who we know and who they know, who will help us out when we need it, who will show up for us and protect us, who will give us a helping hand. And social capital matters because when we have relationships with people, it increases their pro-social behavior. And we've heard lots of beautiful stories over this week about how relationships increase the likelihood that people are going to help you out and do good things. We behave better towards people that we consider one of us than we behave towards people who we consider one of them. One of Al Condalusi's examples of this is, going through the drive-through and receiving incorrect change and an extra $20 bill. And we'd all like to think that we'd be the person who, 5 miles away would recognize that they got the wrong change and turn around and go back, because we know that teenage cashier is going to get in trouble. But if that teenage cashier happens to be your neighbor or your nephew, chances are even higher that you're going to go back and that you're going to make sure that the change is corrected and that the cash is going to balance. Relationships increase pro-social behavior. Okay, so quickly in the chat, what are people's estimations of the average number of relationships that we have in our lives, the typical person has in their lives who doesn't have a disability? Karen says 100. That just came to me directly. Rachel says 100. So that's, Chelsea says 20. It's actually, Karen and Rachel were closer. The average person without a disability has about 150 relationships. Now, these are not best friends, but these are people who contribute to our social capital. What do people imagine is the average number of relationships for people with disabilities? This based on research, by the way. 10, 3, 6, 15 to 20. Depends on the definition of a relationship. So for the purposes of this, a relationship means somebody who has enough of a connection with you to contribute to your social capital. It doesn't necessarily mean people who you are really intimate with or who are going to really go out on a limb for. And the average number of people is actually 24. And so what we see is that people with disabilities on average have 1/5 of the number of significant relationships in their lives as people who don't have disabilities. And this undermines their social capital in devastating ways, which is why relationships are one of the key aspects of taking action. And it's rare that relationships get prioritized in people's lives over therapies and interventions. Now, our roles and abilities through focus on inclusive education and other ways of broadening our world, our focus on relationships, they're often a vehicle to new experiences. However, we still need to bend over backwards to ensure that our kids have a wide variety of rich experiences. Typical life experiences lead to cultural competency, which is likely to increase people's how much people are accepted and how much belonging they find. It helps people to develop their interests and strengths. It helps people to meet people. It helps people develop competencies. So there's a wide, therefore, a wide variety of rich experience also forms a feedback loop for building roles, building ability, and building relationships. I'm going to play a video here of what bending over backwards has looked like for us. And you can see the feedback loop as well. This might be my PowerPoint failure, the fact that none of my videos will play. Finish this discussion piece and then I will go back to that. Okay. So trying to bring this all back together, recognizing, as I just said, that we have a feedback loop. When we have awareness and intentionality, we have direction, like we've already covered. When we have awareness and we deconstruct the problem and we have aware action, we have compensation for the devaluation, unconsciousness, and dominance of the medical model of disability. And when we have a vision and we're taking rare action, we're in a constant state of aspiration, not the respiratory kind, but aspiring, excuse me, just note I should fix that up, of aspiring, having aspiration for a positive future and moving ever towards that positive vision. So I'll leave that up on the screen here while I
Just to say that I'm glad you're focusing especially on parents of young children, because I absolutely think this is where we're missing the ball here, getting started in the right path, as you say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've become just devastated with the number of parents I speak to whose sons or daughters are between 18 and 25, and they are saying, crying, why did nobody tell me this earlier? I often say, given devaluation on consciousness and the dominance of the medical model of disability, helping somebody with a disability to build a positive life and access the good things in life is like pushing a boulder uphill. Doing it or starting, excuse me, when somebody is an adult is like trying to push a boulder uphill during a landslide. It's much more difficult. Starting earlier eliminates a lot of the problems.
Well, especially if you want to build that capital, that social capital too.
That's right. That's right. Okay, I think I've got the video queued up here, so I'm going to
Good work, guys.
All right, so I think, thanks, Barb. I think that leaves us with 5 minutes for conversation. So any questions, feedback?
I think as a mom, I got a little teary-eyed with your family's adventures, and just how good of a mom you are to continue to fight for those experiences and like the normalcy, right, of life for Will. So I just wanted to call that out and say, good job, Mom.
Thanks. I'm actually really not a particularly stellar mother. But what I do understand what the problem is, and I do have a clear vision, and I understand how to take action. So it really has nothing to do with being, particularly special myself. And one of the things that I haven't highlighted in this presentation is the importance of who you surround yourself with. So one of the things that Sarah said in the chat is that Will is as brave AF, as so many adventures that turn my stomach upside down. You might notice that any images of me, I'm just sitting there quietly, maybe kissing the top of his head, and other people who are adventurous are really getting out there, and the people who support me and push me are really, really important. So it's incredibly important as to be very mindful of who you surround yourself with, because they will take you along their path with them.
Jeannie, I'd just like to talk about that assumption piece, right? Bill was never formally taught to read, write, anything like that. Yet in grade 11, he wrote an essay on the witches as the manifestation of Macbeth's inner evil self. And you're going, how did that happen, right? And so if we had never given him that opportunity, he would never have had that chance to do that.
That's right. That's right. And you look at, it's amazing to think about what our kids accomplish given all of the challenges and barriers that they face. So, really thinking about having that clear vision, that very clear, precise vision, and then taking the different aspects of action, maximize the possibility of what they'll be able to accomplish in their lives, for sure. Karen, I see your hand is up. We have 1 minute.
Yeah, one thing that I think we talked about that struck me was the amount of time I spent, energy, cognitive bandwidth, whatever, on things that were special, and in the grand scheme of things, I wish I hadn't bothered with. Not that they were bad, but like no one was saying, hey, you should cultivate an interest in going to for the ice cream shop with other kids. It's like, have you done this? Have you the horseback riding, the whatever? For a while there, it was dolphin something or other. I don't know. But so all those things, they were okay, but they took time and energy away from things that would have been easier on us and way more valuable. And I think that's kind of the real crime. It's all the time you get steered against doing the special things. Is big question. I know it is. It takes energy away from the ordinary things.
Yeah, and when we think of good things in life and those universal. Brian, I'm sorry, she's got 1 more minute, and then you can close the laptop. When we think about those universal good things in life, they are ordinary things. They're not exceptional. Anyway, I think that we are going to, I'm happy to stay in this room and continue to have conversation, but I believe that our closing ceremonies are starting.